My future in-laws called me a gold digger. They spread rumors. They humiliated me, and they did everything they could to tear my life apart, all because I was a simple librarian. What they never imagined was that the man I'd end up walking down the aisle to was their most important client, a secret billionaire. And my wedding. Well, it was going to be their ruin. It all started in the quiet, dusty aisles of the public library where I worked. My life was simple, but I loved it. I found real joy in the rustle of turning pages and the scent of old books. My world was orderly and calm. And then I met Liam. He was a whirlwind of easy charm and infectious laughter, an architect with big dreams of building cities. Our love story honestly felt like something out of a novel. Two people from totally different worlds who just found a home in each other. I loved him deeply and truly. I really thought that's all that mattered. When he proposed 6 months later on a park bench with a simple silver ring, I was over the moon. I was going to marry the love of my life. The first cracks in our little fairy tale, though, appeared when I met his family. Liam came from money, something he'd always been casual about. His parents, Richard and Margaret Sterling, were not. The Sterlings lived in this huge, sterile mansion that felt more like a museum than a home. From the second I stepped inside, I felt like an exhibit they were judging. Richard, with his severe suit and even colder eyes, didn't look at me like I was his son's future wife, but like I was a problem he had to solve. Margaret, who was draped in jewels that could have funded my library for a decade, gave me a smile that didn't come anywhere near her eyes. And then there was Victoria, Liam's sister, whose stare was a nasty mix of pity and contempt. They just peppered me with questions that felt more like an interrogation. A librarian? How? Quaint, Margaret said, and the word just hung in the air like a bad smell. And your family? What do they do? My dad was a retired postal worker and my mom was a part-time seamstress. I watched their faces physically tighten with disapproval. From that very first meeting, they decided I was a gold digger. It was a label they whispered at first, but they got bolder and bolder. They saw my simple background not as something to be proud of, but as proof that I was desperate. They just couldn't wrap their heads around the idea that I loved Liam for the man he was, not for his trust fund. In their world, everything was a transaction, and they'd decided I was just trying to climb the social ladder. They made it their personal mission to expose my so-called scheme and destroy me in the process. I was just a woman in love, but to them, I was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and they were ready to hunt. The next few months were basically a masterclass in psychological warfare. It started small. At family dinners, every single conversation somehow turned to money. "Alara, you must be so excited to not have to worry about bills anymore," Victoria would say with this sickeningly sweet smile. Richard would ask me pointed questions about my career ambitions, implying I had none beyond marrying his son. They made me feel so small, like my life's work was some childish hobby they'd put up with for a little while. I tried to talk about a new literacy program I was launching for underprivileged kids, and they'd exchange this look that just screamed, "How cute, she still pretends to have a purpose." Then, the humiliation got way more direct. I remember one evening, Richard invited some of his business partners over. He introduced me with a verbal pat on the head. "This is Alara, Liam's fiancée. She's a librarian, very grounded." Later, one of the partners asked me what I thought about a recent stock market dip. Before I could even open my mouth, Margaret chimed in with a laugh. "Oh, don't bother Alara with that. Her expertise is in the Dewey Decimal System, not the Dow Jones." The whole table chuckled. My face was burning with shame, so hot it brought tears to my eyes. Liam just squeezed my hand under the table, silently begging me to just take it for his sake. But that feeling of being dismissed like that, of being turned into a caricature of the poor, simple girl, Lit was eating me alive. The message was crystal clear. You are not one of us. The worst part, though, was the smear campaign led by Victoria. She started spreading rumors all through their elite social circles. She told people I was pressuring Liam for a huge, lavish wedding, that I'd been asking about their family trust, that I had a history of dating rich men. None of it was true. We had agreed on a small, intimate wedding. I wanted nothing to do with their money. But the truth didn't matter. The story was already written. Liam's friends got cold. I stopped getting invited to things. I was being systematically cut off, painted as this cunning opportunist. It was emotionally draining. I started to doubt myself, to wonder if just by being with Liam, I was bringing all this toxicity on him. It was during this awful, lonely time that I met Mr. Alistair Blackwood. He was an older gentleman, always impeccably dressed in a classic tweed coat, who started visiting the library every Tuesday. He was quiet, respectful, and he loved history books. We started talking, first about ancient civilizations, and then just about life. He was such a kind, listening ear, and for the first time in months, I felt like someone saw me, not what they assumed I wanted. I found myself confiding in him, telling him about the pressure I was under, even if I kept the details vague. I told him how it felt to be so judged and misunderstood. He never gave me advice, he just listened with this deep empathy that was like a balm to my frayed nerves. He became my safe harbor in the middle of a storm. One afternoon, I overheard Richard and Liam arguing in the study. Richard sounded frantic. "We have to land the Blackwood account. Alistair Blackwood is our white whale. If he pulls his portfolio, we're finished." The name hit me. I peeked in and saw them looking at a business magazine. On the cover was the same kind, elderly man I shared book recommendations with every Tuesday. The headline read, "Alistair Blackwood, the reclusive billionaire reshaping global finance." My heart stopped. My quiet, gentle friend from the library was their most important client, and they had no clue. I closed the door silently, and a strange, powerful idea started to form in my mind. They were trying to convince me I was worthless, but I was starting to realize my own value in a way I never saw coming. If you've ever felt underestimated, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, because you know how satisfying it is when the tables finally turn. A final straw wasn't some big, dramatic fight. It was a quiet, soul-crushing moment that showed me that the crack in my relationship with Liam was too deep to fix. His parents invited us to their country club for their anniversary. I was on edge the second we arrived. Margaret made a whole show of looking over my dress, as a simple but elegant navy blue gown I'd saved for months to buy. "Did you find that at a department store, dear?" she asked, loud enough for her friends to hear. It's just amazing what they can do with synthetics these days. I tried to ignore it, to hold my head high. But later, Victoria cornered me by the bar holding 2 glasses of champagne. "One of these is vintage Dom Perignon, costs about $2,000 a bottle," she said, her eyes glittering with malice. "The other is sparkling cider. I wonder which one you're more accustomed to." It was so petty and childish, all of it designed to make me feel like an imposter. I looked for Liam, needing him to finally step up and say, "Enough." I found him across the terrace, laughing with his father and their friends. I walked over, my heart pounding. As I got closer, I heard his father say, "And the best part is the prenup. Our lawyers are drafting the tightest agreement you've ever seen. She won't get a dime when this little experiment is over." I froze. I was just waiting for Liam's outrage, for him to fiercely defend our love. Instead, he just chuckled nervously and raised his glass. "Dad, come on, let's not talk about that now," he said. Not with anger, but with the tired voice of a son just trying to manage his overbearing father. He looked up, saw me standing there, and his face went completely pale. In that 1 second, I saw everything with perfect, painful clarity. He wasn't my partner. He was their son. He would never really choose me. He would only ever try to manage the situation, smooth things over, and ask me to take the disrespect just to keep his own peace. The love I felt for him was real, but it wasn't enough to fight a lifetime of his family's influence and his own weakness. The engagement ring on my finger suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. I walked away without saying a word. I left the party, took a taxi back to our apartment, and packed a bag. When Liam came home hours later, full of apologies and excuses, I was sitting on the couch with the ring on the coffee table between us. "I can't do this anymore, Liam," I said, my voice just hollow. "I can't spend the rest of my life being judged by your family and knowing you'll never really have my back. It was the hardest decision of my life. But I knew it was the right one." I walked out and left my old life behind. The next few days were a blur. I felt completely lost. One rainy afternoon, I was sitting in a small cafe, just staring out the window, when the bell on the door jingled. It was Alistair. He saw me, and his face just softened with concern. He sat down and simply said, "Tell me what happened." And so I did. I poured out the whole story, the insults, the rumors, the country club, the prenup, and that heartbreaking realization about Liam. When I finished, with tears streaming down my face, he reached across the table and gently patted my hand. "My dear Alara," he said, his voice firm but so kind. "You are not the gold digger. They are. They are so blinded by money that they can't recognize the true value of a person's heart and mind. Their loss will be profound." In the weeks that followed, Alistair became my rock. He helped me find a new apartment, he listened while I worked through my heartbreak, and he kept reminding me of my own strength. Our friendship, which started in the quiet of the library, deepened into something more. I saw the man behind the billions, a man who, like me, valued kindness, intelligence, and a real connection more than anything. He told me he'd spent years building a wall of wealth around himself, only to find it was profoundly lonely. He started going to the library just to feel normal again, to find a place where he wasn't just seen as a bank account. He confessed he had fallen for the librarian who saw him as a fellow book lover, not as a billionaire. One evening, he took me to dinner at this quiet, elegant restaurant. "Alara," he began, his eyes serious, "I have grown to care for you more deeply than I ever thought possible. You are the most authentic, intelligent, and compassionate person I have ever known. I know your heart is still healing, but I have to ask, would you consider sharing your life with me?" It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was a slow, steady burn of mutual respect and real affection. With him, I wasn't an accessory or a project. I was a partner. I was home. I said yes. We planned our wedding with a beautiful, quiet efficiency. Alistair wanted me to have everything I ever dreamed of, but what I really wanted was simple, a day filled with love, not pretending. We decided on a breathtaking botanical garden conservatoria palace of glass and flowers. The guest list was small, but there was one group of people Alistair insisted we invite, the Sterling family. He sent the invitation directly to Richard Sterling's office. It was a thick, cream-colored card, embossed with the Blackwood family crest. It announced the marriage of Alistair Blackwood, but with no mention of the bride's name. For the Sterlings, this was the ultimate social prize, an invitation to the personal wedding of their most powerful client. They thought this was it, the moment that would secure their company's future and their social standing for generations. Victoria was ecstatic, going on and on about what she would wear. Richard and Margaret were practically glowing with smugness. Liam, I heard through a mutual friend, was miserable but was being forced to go. On the day of the wedding, I stood behind a screen of orchids waiting for the ceremony to start. I could see the guests finding their seats, and then I watched the Sterlings arrive. They were the perfect picture of arrogance and ambition. Richard walked with his chest puffed out. Margaret scanned the wealthy crowd like she owned the place, and Victoria looked around as if she were already the star of the show. They took their seats in the second row, completely clueless. The music started. The large doors at the end of the conservatory opened. I took a deep breath and started my walk down the aisle. At first, there was just a collective gasp from the guests, but I only had eyes for the second row. I watched as Victoria's head turned. Her eyes went wide and the smug smile on her face didn't just fall, it shattered. She nudged her mother. Margaret looked, and her hand flew to her mouth, her perfect composure just crumbling. Richard's face went from a confident red to a ghastly pale white. He looked from me to Alistair waiting at the altar with a calm, steady smile, and then back to me. The connection was made. The gears in his greedy mind turned, processing the impossible truth. The librarian, the worthless, gold-digging nobody they tried to cast out, was the bride. The woman they had humiliated and dismissed was marrying the billionaire they had spent years drooling over. Their ruin wasn't coming in a boardroom. It was walking down an aisle, dressed in white. I saw the dawning horror in their eyes, the complete and utter devastation as they realized that their prejudice, their cruelty, and their obsession with money had led them straight to this moment of social and financial annihilation. As I reached the altar and took Alistair's hand, I gave them one last look. It wasn't a look of triumph or hate. It was a look of pity. They had lost everything, all because they couldn't see the value in anything that couldn't be counted. The ceremony was beautiful. But for the Sterlings, it was a funeral. They sat through the whole thing in stunned, horrified silence. After we were pronounced husband and wife, and Alistair and I walked back down the aisle, he paused by their row. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "Richard," he'd said, his voice low and cold as ice, "thank you for coming. Please have your office clear out your desks by Monday. Our business relationship is, as of this moment, terminated. You publicly and repeatedly humiliated my wife. You will find that the consequences for that are severe." The news spread through the reception like wildfire. By the end of the night, every major player in their industry knew that Sterling & Sons had been fired, publicly, by their biggest client for mistreating his new wife. Their social standing just evaporated in a single evening. Their phones went unanswered. Contracts were mysteriously canceled. The empire they had built on reputation was demolished by their own character. They had called me a gold digger, but in the end, they were the ones who had staked their entire world on a fortune. They were so busy protecting their money from a threat that wasn't even there, they didn't see the real danger was their own arrogance. I found my happily ever after, not in Alistair's wealth, but in his respect. I found a man who valued my heart and my mind. The Sterlings were left with what they truly worshipped: money, and the bitter, lonely reality that it couldn't buy them class, kindness, or a future. They thought they were judging my worth, but they only revealed their own lack of it. Have you ever had to prove someone wrong in a big way? Share your story of sweet revenge in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more.